Funding for the Think podcast comes from Texas Mutual Insurance Company, a workers' comp provider committed to helping employers get their people home safe every day. Preventing workplace accidents can help build a stronger, safer Texas. More at texasmutual.com.
The classic advice to career seekers says, do what you love and you'll never work a day in your life. But maybe that old adage should come with a warning. Do what you love and your employer will squeeze a lot of unpaid labor out of you. From KERA in Dallas, this is Think. I'm Chris Boyd. Of course, it's a good thing if we can enjoy the thing we do for a living. We spend a lot of our adult lives working, after all. But these days, our culture encourages using work as a primary source of meaning in our lives. And we seem to admire those who love their jobs so much they would do them whether or not they got paid. But most of us need to get paid, right? And my guest says losing sight of that fact because we're so devoted to our careers is actually bad for all workers. Erin A. Seck is Associate Professor of Sociology at the University of Michigan. Her book is called The Trouble with Passion: How Searching for Fulfillment at Work Fosters Inequality. Erin, welcome to Think.
Thanks for having me, Chris.
Early in your working life, you would have seemed the least likely person to write a book arguing against putting our passions first when trying to find a career. You moved, out of electrical engineering and into sociology?
That is right. I was an evangelist of the idea of following your passion. I followed my passion from engineering into sociology, finished out an engineering degree, and promptly went to get a PhD in sociology because it was what I loved.
So I gather you're still happy with that choice. How did you start to recognize the potential pitfalls of passion careers?
It really had to hit me in the head with the data. So much of my research is in the space of inequality in occupations, particularly gender inequality in occupations. And so I was doing some interviews to try and understand why we see this sort of strong perpetuation of male-dominated and female-dominated occupations in the United States. And so I was doing interviews with undergraduates to try and understand why they chose the majors that they chose, what they were thinking about doing after graduation. And I kept hearing this narrative of wanting to find meaning, wanting to find their passion over and over again. And this really flew in the face of a lot of the sort of long-standing ideas in fields like sociology and economics that suggest that people pursue fields that are most economically advantageous to them, will bring decent salaries, will bring job security. And that just was not the narratives I was hearing from these students. So that's when I decided to dig deeper with this project.
So when you say gender inequality made you think about this, my first thought is teaching, which is a female-dominated profession in this country. And even when teachers are lobbying for more money, they're always quick to say, of course, I'm not just doing this for the money. Like we would think you were a bad teacher if you just got the job for the paycheck.
Indeed. And there's a lot of professions like that, particularly in the not-for-profit sector, but also in spaces where there's a lot of expectation for doing work out of emotional labor. So teaching is part of that, nursing is part of that. And you'll notice that the things that we tend to expect that kind of labor of love from are often women-dominated fields that we presume people are going into because they love the work first and foremost, and it happens to come with a paycheck afterward. And that sort of entrenches a lot of the lack of strong salaries and financial support that accompany those kinds of professions and lead to the continuation of things like wage inequality by gender in the United States.
It provides a kind of social cover too, doesn't it? Like our society might immediately offer a kind of respect to people who earn a lot of money for their work, but we also respect people who settle for less income because they love their work. Are we somehow complicit in accepting lower rates of pay in exchange for jobs we like?
We're not necessarily complicit in our own lack of pay per se, but if we take the stance that people should do what they love, even if that means sacrificing pay and economic stability, what that can lead to is something I call choice washing. This means explaining existing patterns of difference and inequality as though they were only the result of individual choice. Seeing, for example, the differences in pay between K-12 educators and engineers as somehow justifiable because they are the result of people choosing to go into certain fields rather than others. But that belies the differential valuation and the differential rewards that we tend to give to different occupations, often depending on who are the primary or the dominant population sociodemographically that tend to be in those fields.
Do we need a definition here? Like, what does it mean to have passion for our work?
So passion can mean a lot of different things in a lot of different social contexts, of course, but what I mean by passion is the sense of a personal fulfillment, a personal connection to the substantive arena of one's work. So this can show up in a lot of ways. This can show up as a sense of intellectual connection to the work. So I feel intrigued or curious or excited about the work when I do it. It can be an emotional and affective response, feeling excited and joyful about the work when I do it. Or it can be something that's more biographical or a sense of personal fit or idiosyncratic fit with some kind of field.
It seems like 21st century students are often advised to let their passions guide them to a career path. Is that as true for blue-collar workers as it is for people whose jobs require a college degree?
I think blue-collar workers, non-college educated service sector workers tend to encounter a little bit of a different narrative, one that is about seeking to find work that has a decent wage and has some kind of job stability. And a lot of that has to do with the lack of access to those basic things for many blue-collar and service sector workers. So compared to those with a college education, those without really are at a disservice in terms of being able to find jobs that are at or above the minimum wage that can provide some kind of a living that will allow for, beyond a kind of poverty level wage. And those with a college degree are often engaged in institutions, whether in college and beyond, that promote the idea of finding jobs that they love, or at least trying to find a closer alignment with the things that they find meaningful and fulfilling, and the way that they earn their living. That's not to say, though, that those without a college degree don't feel pressure to perform their jobs as though they were passionate. One of the things that is so pernicious about the idea of the passion principle and the widespread extent of the idea of pursuing your passion in the United States is that there are many places that expect service sector workers, even blue-collar workers, to do their jobs as though they find meaning and fulfillment in them. A good example of this is baristas. So Starbucks, for example, will often advertise that their passion is to serve the customer. And so this isn't just being nice to the customer and being polite and considerate, but also making a latte as though the barista is passionate about the latte creation
asking
process,
a lot.
passionate about the beans. It is. It's a tremendous amount of work that has to be put in that is beyond just the physical act of making the latte.
Are people who end up in careers that match their passions happier overall than people who don't?
They are happier in their job, but they're not necessarily happier in their life overall. And this has to do with a lot of complicated factors about one's ability to access the resources they need in their lives and the kinds of relationships they have in their lives. And we know that when people are working in jobs that they are passionate about, they are more engaged in the work that they're doing. But that also means they are putting more work effort into their job. So employers tend to get more out of workers who are passionate about their work than workers who are not, even when we hold constant things like education level and experience.
And employers, of course, are delighted to find somebody who professes passion, who convinces them that they're passionate about their work. You're more likely to get a job if you convince an employer that this is the thing you were born to do.
Yeah, that's what I found in some experimental research. So what I did is I presented fictitious but really convincingly realistic application materials to a set of college-educated workers and those with hiring authority. And I said, would you be interested in hiring this person? And the reason that the fictitious applicant gave for being interested in the job varied. So in one version, they were really invested in the organization. Another version, they really liked the location where the organization was. And in another condition, they were passionate about the work. And what I found is that the passionate applicant was preferred much more frequently than the applicants who were interested and motivated to do the job for other reasons. But the reason that the passionate applicant was preferred was not only because the people evaluating the applicant would think that they were a good worker, but that they would be willing to put in more work without an increase in pay.
So is that how our collective belief in the importance of passion careers contributes to income inequality?
That's one part of it, in that people who are passionate about their jobs may be more willing to engage in work without pushing for an increase in pay. But another process is how people end up in jobs that they're passionate about in the first place. So what I find is that when you look across college students, there's a tendency to want to follow their passion. About 75% of the college students I spoke to and surveyed were invested in the idea that they want to find something that's meaningful and fulfilling to them, not only in their major, but in their career. But who has the resources to be able to translate what they're passionate in into actual stable, well-paying employment is really different depending on the socioeconomic background that students come from. So what I find is that students from wealthier backgrounds whose parents have money that they're willing to help support their college student and their college graduate with, have social springboards that they can connect their child to in terms of knowing people in the industry, knowing people in the professional realm. Those career aspirants are much more likely to land in jobs that are not only aligned with their passion, but are well paid and stable, compared to students who are first generation college graduates or come from working class families. So we see this differentiation between the ability to get employment in people's passion that seems to perpetuate the kind of economic inequality that students come into college with.
This is Think. I'm Chris Boyd. How does the passion principle interact with our persistent beliefs that workplaces are inherently meritocratic, as if they operate kind of outside the reality of pre-existing social and economic privilege?
What happens is the idea of the passion principle can serve as both a prescriptive narrative that we tell people that they should follow their passion, but also as an explanatory one, helping us explain why we see these patterns of differentiation and inequality in the United States. And it does that by tying into the idea of the meritocratic ideology. As you noted, Chris, the idea that the labor force is inherently fair and equal, and as long as you do the work and you have the talent, that anyone can succeed regardless of their demographics or their economic background. And the passion principle really provides this individualizing edge to the idea of the meritocratic ideology, meaning that someone can look at things like racial segregation in occupations or gender segregation in occupations and say, the reason that exists is because different people are passionate about different things and therefore pursue different paths in their career, that it can explain away the structural and cultural processes of racism and sexism we know to be there, but can be wiped away with the lens of thinking about it as both the result of passion seeking in the context of a fair and meritocratic labor force.
Something that has occurred to me many times over the years is the fact that most of us choose our field of study and our careers when we're quite young, before we have other people counting on us. So it may work fine, right, to make just enough at a passion career to keep a roof over our heads when we're in our early 20s. Once we have a partner and kids, we might feel really differently about the importance of a steady, solid income. Do your studies reach long enough that you can sort of see how people feel about their choices mid-career?
The longitudinal portions don't necessarily, but I do have nice cross-sectional data, meaning I can look at the priorities of people who are mid-career and later versus people who are earlier in their career. And what I find so interesting is actually the strongest adherents to the passion principle are the people who are mid-career and older. So people in their mid 40s and 50s and 60s. Those are the people who are the strongest adherents to the passion principle, whether or not they have children. And the people who are actually most skeptical of the passion principle, relatively speaking, they're still often very strong adherents to the idea. But the people who express more skepticism than others are people who are just starting out their career. And this may be due to their forward thinking about if they're planning on having a family, what that means in terms of their ability to support that family. But it also could be people who are in their career later on and looking retrospectively about they're thinking about their own career paths. And this ties in really closely to the idea of encore careers, this notion that people are in their 50s and early 60s and saying, I am done with having a career that I don't love. I'm going to totally switch gears. I'm going to get a different degree. I'm going to go to law school after all and become a particular kind of lawyer that I've always wanted to do now that my kids are grown. So the passion principle has different implications for people at different points in their career, but even people who are far beyond that early stage of career decision making are still impacted by it.
What did you learn, Erin, about how college career counselors talk about passion with students seeking their guidance?
When I did interviews of college career counselors and coaches, I really expected that population to be a place where there would be counter narratives to the passion principle, really strong ones, in part because they are the professionals that are given the sort of cultural and social esteem of being the place that people go for help with career decision making. And I did find some career counselors and coaches who pushed back on the idea that everyone should follow their passion and took a more agnostic way of thinking about career advising that took students and young professionals ways of thinking about their careers into account in a more holistic way. But the majority of the people that I talk to seem to buy into this idea of passion seeking. And in fact, some said that they would actively push back against students who wanted to prioritize money in their job seeking as something that might lead to a career of drudgery, or that they might lose a sense of self. And part of that comes down to the way that many career counselors start off their conversations with career advisees using what are often tools of assessment, things like the strong interest inventory. There's other ones out there that do similar things, but what they all tend to do is to ask students a series of questions about the things that they like, the things that they identify, and from there produce a set of occupations that seems to be things that would align with the student's interests. But what that does is actually just concretizes, quantifies the idea that we should find our sense of identity in our paid employment, rather than taking other factors like risk assessment and the importance of money or leisure time into account as well.
Assuming we don't want to create a world in which students are advised to just study whatever will earn them the most money regardless of their interests, how can we productively shift conversations around career selection so that passion isn't overly prioritized?
Sure. There's a few things that we want to keep in mind. First, at the institutional level, we need to do a better job of evening the playing field for students coming in. As I was talking about earlier, the part of the issue of the passion principle in terms of reproducing economic inequality is that students come in not having equal ability, equal springboards and safety nets to be able to parlay their passion into employment. So working to reduce things like student loan debt and providing opportunities for students to take unpaid internships when they need that payment to be able to support themselves at the institutional level can start to undermine some of the negative consequences of the promotion of the passion principle. But at the individual level, I think we need to have more holistic conversations with college students, with those who are thinking about going to college, and young adults generally about what they want their relationship to work to be. Is it something that they want to have money and resources to be able to pursue other kinds of interests outside? Do they want to be able to prioritize times with friends and family? And what might that mean in terms of their career? But even those students who are invested in pursuing a passion, there's a number of things that we should be talking to them about. First and foremost is, how can you make sure you have room in your schedule to find meaning outside of work? How can you schedule time to invest mental, physical, emotional energy in things that are completely separate from the major that you're pursuing and the career that you want to pursue down the line, to make sure that you have places outside of work for that meaning? I call this diversifying our meaning-making portfolios. And I think that's important not only for working professionals, but also for young adults. And beyond that, we want to encourage young adults to think about getting experience, getting knowledge and training in things that might be outside of that passion. So the sociology students that I advise, I often tell them, maybe you should get a minor in accounting, or look at data analytics as a place where you can get additional training to allow them to have a more diversified platform to stand on in terms of their training, to make it easier for them to find employment down the line. And then finally, it's talking to young adults about what it means to make change in the labor market generally. So we know that changes to norms of overwork and expectations for work devotion are not something that individual workers can change as individuals, that we need to think about more collective solutions, things that include not only changes to corporate culture, but also better support for workers, not only those who have the privilege of pursuing their passion, but also those who labor in jobs that are far removed from the ability to find fulfillment and joy in the work that they do.
Does passion for a particular career tend to translate to passion for the organization that employs you to do that career?
That's a really interesting question. And it doesn't necessarily. In fact, many people can be really passionate about the work that they do and have deep-seated frustration or anger with the organization that they're working for. And that's one of the things that is actually really interesting about the prioritization of passionate applicants among potential employers, because this isn't people who say, I love Facebook and I want to work for Facebook. This is people saying, I love coding and I want to do coding at Facebook. So what happens is, if people find their passion is not well served in the organization they're working for, they may very well leave and find work that they're passionate about in other organizations. And so to prioritize forcefully finding people who are passionate about their work isn't necessarily well aligned with organizational goals as we might expect.
So, what do we do about the culture created in workplaces filled with passionate people? 3 people on a work team may be really passionate about the work. Another may be more than willing to put in a solid full-time week, but not more. That person, even if they're performing according to expectations, is going to look bad compared to the people who say they eat, sleep, and breathe this occupation.
Yeah, that's one of the problems of the prominence of the passion principle is this conflation of being passionate about the work to producing good work output. And those things are certainly not always aligned. And so for the benefit of everyone on that hypothetical team, the expectations for being on all the time, being responsive all the time should be dialed back. That's not only good for the person who isn't necessarily passionate about the work, but is likely good for the people who are passionate about the work as well. We know that when we give workers time outside of work to recuperate, regenerate, they actually produce better work. They're more productive, they're more creative, they're more resilient in the work that they do. So actually reducing the footprint of work in one's time and one's attention on a day-to-day and week-to-week basis can be good for everyone, the people who aren't passionate about their work as well as the people who are.
Erin, have you found any major employers who agree with that?
I'm not that have come to me and gleefully proclaim that they want to dial down passion in their organizations, but I think there are some companies that are really trying to think about work-life balance in a more holistic way and recognize that if we push workers to work so hard, they're not going to necessarily produce the type of work we want. A good example of this is the company BCG. This is research that was done by Leslie Perlow, and they did an experiment where they had, and these are high-flying consultants. These are people who work far more than 40 hours a week on a regular basis, and they instituted a mandatory time off for those teams, and they said everybody gets one night off where they are turning off their cell phones, they're not checking their Slack channels, and we want to maintain and protect that for everyone, regardless of how invested and passionate they were with the work. And they found that they were producing better outcomes and they were better communicating on their teams because they had to check in with one another to make sure that they were working around that protected time off. So there have been some organizations who are willing to attempt moving in this kind of direction and with good outcomes.
All right, let's take a call now from Grace in Dallas. Hi, Grace.
Hi, I'm a student in college, and I'm also a career mentor for middle and high school kids. And I was curious how she thought some of this could be applied to younger kids and kind of preventing some of the passion talk before they get too old.
Thanks for calling.
That's a great question, Grace, and thank you for the work that you're doing to mentor those who are younger than you. So I would say one of the biggest concerns around the prioritization of passion for those who are in elementary school and middle school, and even those who are just starting high school, is the kind of limitations they put on the classes that they'll take because they don't think it aligns with what they find interesting or engaging. And the problem with this is those decisions are often done in alignment with gender norms, race norms, class norms, because we're raised in social structures that are gendered and classed and racialized. What we come to find is interesting to us, that we are passionate about, tends to be inflected with gender and race and class as well. So when we give young people the opportunity to choose some classes rather than others, especially at a young age, that means that they might be artificially restricting their exposure to things that they might actually be really good at, or they might actually find really interesting along the lines of the way that they've been socialized socialized along these sociodemographic lines. So what I would say to you, Grace, is have conversations with the young people that you're working with to say, I know you might not like that kind of class or find that kind of class interesting or intriguing, but it might be really important for you down the line to be able to open up a whole array of opportunities that you have in front of you, either to find things that actually interest you, to your surprise, or to be able to provide opportunities that allow you to have a career that will support your pursuit of passions outside of work.
So in other words, if work doesn't give meaning to your life, there are lots of other waking hours to fill with things we care about.
Indeed, and trying to shrink that footprint of work as much as we can.
Erin Acek is Associate Professor of Sociology at the University of Michigan. Her book is called The Trouble with Passion, How Searching for Fulfillment at Work Fosters Inequality. Erin, thanks very much for spending this time with us.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me, Chris.
You can like our page on Facebook. We're also on Twitter. Our handle is @KERAthink. If you want the podcast, it is free wherever you get podcasts. Just search for KERA Think and please subscribe.